This week on FX Guide TV.
We talked to the filmmakers of Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs 2 and discussed their use of the animation development tool FLIX from the Foundry, which Sony Pictures Animation initially developed.
This podcast is brought to you by fxphd.com. Take your career to the next level with outstanding up-to-date training, VPN software access to major applications, and direct engagement with industry professionals. Find out more at fxphd.com.
This and more coming up next.
Hello, I'm Angie Dale and welcome to FX Guide TV. Animated films, or kids' animated films, used to be the best financial bet in the industry, and almost none ever failed to make a healthy box office. But this year has been much, much tougher, and few have broken out and really found an audience. One that most definitely has is the latest from Sony Pictures Animation, Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs 2, which was directed by Cody Cameron and Chris Pern. Mike Seymour visited the team in LA and sat down with the directors and some of the key artists to discuss the heroic antics of Flint Lockwood and his food machine.
This is Sam Sparks, live from Chew and Swallow. We are about to be in the epicenter of a perfect food storm.
It's been some time now since inventor Flint Lockwood's food replicator.
Flint Lockwood Diatonic Super Mutating Dynamic Food Replicator, or for short, the Flintsildifer,
turned the planet into a giant Vegas-style buffet. No place took the hit nearly as hard as on the island of Swallow Falls.
I can't believe my machine created all of this. Are those shrimpanzees?
Butter.
Look, mosquitoes. Parquet.
Those are some tasty-looking jellyfish.
Hungry.
It's enough to make a grown man cry. But not this man. Get back in there, Tia.
What was that?
Taco Dial Supreme. Come on, everyone.
There's a leak in the boat!
Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2.
So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
So in terms of the start of the process, coming up with the plot and the story, where we left these characters last, was it an easy process to work out where the story was going to go?
We had a lot of leftover ideas from the first film. So when we started to riff in the story room in terms of the what-ifs of this film, we knew we had a hook in terms of wanting to do a monster movie, and we knew we wanted to kind of graduate Flint, so take him off the island and sort of give room for the island to transform. So we had a couple of footholds. So very early on, we just played in the room, and you know, the story process is a lot of spaghetti on the wall. You're just kind of throwing up ideas and seeing what sticks. So it was pretty natural.
I've got to say, in the first film, I just fell in love with some of the characters. The father, in particular, just seemed to me.
Yeah, Tim Lockwood.
Yeah, just great. From a story point of view, is the characterizations, the stuff that endears the character to me, which isn't necessarily a plot-related stuff, is that coming after you've penciled in the plot, or are you really sort of thinking, I want this character to have this kind of thing, and then we're going to find business for him, like the father?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that we were going to have pickles in the film somehow. And it somehow kind of happened that Tim should go off with these pickles as kind of like a B story. And you really can't remember how it started, but it seemed kind of funny for this character that didn't talk much in the film to then be with these characters who's just kind of garbled nonsense.
It's sort of, it's a real messy process. And like, I don't know if there's ever really a clean cart and horse for a story. That's why it takes 3 years, because you're just kind of mucking around trying to find, you know, the best version of it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I remember Tim as a character, he was late to come into the first film. I think I was on it for 3 years before he kind of showed up.
Yeah.
He was the tackle shop owner, but he didn't have any legs because he was only modeled to be behind the thing.
Yeah.
So like the reality of sort of how these things kind of find their way into the film is really, you're pushed around based upon sort of how the movie screens. We screen quite a bit, so we respond to the audience. We're always looking to calibrate sort of how our characters are communicating to people, and we're just looking for opportunities to kind of further our theme. And the plot kind of follows that, you know what I mean? So you're always trying to make it as entertaining as possible, and as funny as possible, and as emotional as possible.
Right.
So it's that digging process where things end up kind of coming out.
I mean, clearly it's also not a linear process in terms of the look and the environment and the story. But again, was there concept art that kind of inspired story, or was it more the case that you really knew what the world was going to look like, and then we just had to flesh that out through the process of look development?
When we started talking about the story, I think from the beginning knew we wanted to do this overgrown jungle in the town, and also these kind of food environments. So, you know, even before we had the story, we were thinking of like, well, we could turn the lab upside down. It could be like hanging from a tree up in vines. And we kind of had like some general ideas that we were thinking about, and we started to kind of pull those together. And when we started talking about story, we looked to see what would fit in with, you know, the story we're telling, if we could still use some of these locations and props, and yeah.
Of course, one of the reasons I'm asking that is I was curious about the use of technology and something like FLIX in actually helping with that process, because as we said, it's not particularly linear. I mean, you're wanting to basically be able to do a lot of iterations on anything, I guess, in the early stages.
I mean, communication is a key thing to kind of pull in, like the 17 people that are kind of involved with that story construction at the beginning. It's like herding cats, right? So the idea of having one tool that you could then tap into. So we would be up in VizDev looking at a design for something, and whoever the artist is, we could pull up the sequence and sort of show them where we're at with story. And it allowed us to communicate that way. And we didn't even have to be in the room for that to happen. So that was the other really cool thing.
Also, if someone was working on a sequence and they wanted to see what state it was in, they could bring up the sequence and say, oh, that moment, it's not in there anymore. I don't have to design that thing.
Yeah, and the really cool thing too is, like, you know, we're spread out. So we have editorial over in one building over here. We're downstairs. VizDev's up over here. So at any given moment, you can pick up a phone and say, you know, hey, pull up the FLIX. You know, we got some thoughts in there. So it allowed us to kind of be very efficient too. So it was a great communication tool that allowed us to be in multiple places at once. So
I guess one of the things I've been concerned about with computer graphics is because inherently it used to be very slow, it felt like there were layers between you and your work, because you had to basically tell someone to move a mouse to move the thing on the screen. I'm wondering how much you were able to just grab a tablet yourself and kind of communicate what you wanted visually.
Yeah, I mean, that's since we both come from story, you know, we do a lot of drawings, and it is sometimes easier just to do a drawing rather than trying to explain it.
Yeah.
And also a lot of times when we're up in editorial, if we need a quick fix to go into editorial right away, we would just do it ourselves on a Cintiq and send it. Yeah. Or sometimes we could rough something out and then tell the artist to open it up and they could work on it and see what our notes were.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for all the technology, our process is actually fairly low rent in terms of it's just like a pencil. You know, it's a digital pencil and it's a $4,000 sketchbook, but you know what I mean? But they're all connected, so it makes it easy to sort of just be very fluid about it. And same thing with our design team and all of our story artists. Like, everybody just draws their ideas and feeds them into it.
So in terms of the film, from your points of view, when was the first time you felt like you actually had and obviously we're talking at an animatic stage, when was the first time you felt like you had a cut? In other words, you had a sequence of stills or whatever that played that let you actually judge how the film was coming together?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, we had multiple screenings throughout the process, and our first big one was that December of 10, or was it?
Say 10, okay. Just to make it sound more dramatic, you know?
Yeah, but after, maybe 3 months, 4 months of development, we had our first screening, and I think there are moments that were in that screen that still exist in our film in its current state.
Yeah.
So while things all around can change, usually you'll have at least a nugget or two that hold up all the way through the process.
I know on the creative side, for me, it was like that scene that Lizito boarded where Flint found Barry.
Yeah.
I remember that was it was a very early scene. It was in one of our first screenings, and it was one of those moments where it's like, I can kind of see the potential of what this movie will be. You know what I mean? So, yeah, and that was, you know, that's just the process of editorial and just cutting it and then finding something that really makes you laugh, and then it sort of feels real even though it's not fully fleshed out.
Yeah.
Sam!
Yeah, so I work sort of an end-to-end. I'm a computer graphics supervisor, so I work end-to-end. I start initially on the characters, and I go all the way into lighting. So I'm what's known more of sort of as a front-end CG supervisor. So I deal with the building of the characters, the modeling of the characters. I work a lot with layout. I work a lot with animation. I'm obviously working with the visual effects supervisor, and I'm working with the directors to sort of achieve what they're looking for to put it on screen. But I start really at the initial part of a show and go all the way to the end. So I kind of see everything that happens on a show.
So communication must be key in that, because you just want to not lose nuggets of gems of information from the directors, or for that matter, just humor in a shot that gets lost because it gets sort of missed in translation.
Yeah, and one of the things that we often deal with is because we're starting with storyboards and we're starting sort of the initial thoughts of what the directors want, you're really looking at those things on a daily basis. You're seeing updates to storyboards. You're seeing as things develop, even looking further, because we're dealing with characters. It's like, what new characters have they introduced? So looking at storyboards, looking ahead, and looking at sort of the way the film's being developed, because obviously with animated features, you never get the full movie really until it's done. So there needs to be flexibility in the system to allow you to sort of look ahead and really see what's going to happen sort of way ahead of the rest of the teams, especially in the stuff that I do.
So how integrated into that communications process is FLIX?
Well, that's one of the things that's great about FLIX, is that you are seeing sort of I would almost put it as sort of a real-time look at what the storyboard artists are putting together, what the directors are actually thinking. It's being updated, as many times as they update it, it versions up. It says, okay, well, now you have a new version of this storyboard or of this sequence. And because we're so sequence-based, you kind of know that, oh, that's a new sequence. I have to look ahead to that sequence. Oh, wow, they just added 5 new characters to that sequence. That's kind of, it doesn't worry me, but now that I know about it, it's better. It's better to see ahead of time. And with FLIX, it really gave us the flexibility. I'm not having to look at a QuickTime, that editorial dumped out. I'm looking at something that's updated, could be on an hourly basis, of what the story artists are what they're actually working on. So
how does FLIX actually work for an artist? I mean, where do they see it? How do they interact with it?
So FLIX is a web-based, it basically runs on any sort of browser. We can actually, the beauty of what we do, we have Linux. I have a MacBook, Air that I use at work. I also have, anybody that has a browser, has a web browser, can see, as long as they have access to it, they can see the sequences as they're being updated. And, an example that I always tend to use is that, I'm working at work, but I sometimes do work at home, and I can VPN in via my laptop, and I can actually see the same thing I see at work from my laptop. And so if I'm looking ahead, or if I had an idea of like, oh yeah, what was that character doing at this one time, I can actually do it from home. And that's, to me, that's the real power of FLIX, is that it's platform independent. You don't need to be logged into this application that needs to be running on this specific box. You don't need to get a dump from QuickTime in terms of like, oh, I didn't get the latest. You can really be anywhere in the world and access what is being worked on from that story, from the story standpoint. And to me, that's really powerful.
Okay, help me out here. Like, you've got hundreds of versions of some of these stuff. In the early days, exactly what you should be doing, right? Sure. Tons of iterations, lots of different artists working. Everybody's moving very quickly. How does it not just become a huge jumble and you just clobber each other?
Well, that's kind of the beauty of the system, is that it versions itself. It keeps track of all that data for you. So every time you update an image, you're actually updating the version of that story sequence in FLIX. So it's keeping track of that data for you. So as an artist is sending a new image for that specific shot, because we're working in shots, or even within a shot, you could have 5 panels that you're panning across. So, if you're going to shoot 5 different versions of that camera, you're actually going to say, okay, well, now I have 5 versions of it. I can just pick the one I want, and it'll keep track of that for you. I'm going to say, oh, that's the one I want to use. I'm going to send that back, and the layout artist can say, oh yeah, that's the one. I remember shooting that. I remember the camera that I picked, and all they have to do is click on it, and it automatically goes into their Maya session.
I imagine one of the things that's key in your job is making sure everyone feels involved, that they feel like they're on the same page and that they're up to date with what's sort of happening. And I think one of the things I've heard that's kind of interesting is that FLIX allows some departments to get in a little earlier than maybe they otherwise would, because they can effectively, like lighting can come in when things are still not ready to be handed over to lighting and start exploring some stuff. As a supervisor, that must be tremendous for running the team.
Yeah, and a lot of what we try to do, you know, that kind of communication is, I mean, from a supervisor standpoint, you're sort of managing all these different people, right? Well, did you, you know, because many instances I've had it where, well, why didn't you pick up the right camera? Why didn't you do this? Oh, it wasn't version ready. I didn't get the file because you sent it to me in an email. Like that all goes away with FLIX, because you're basically you're just clicking on an image and you're saying, and everybody is seeing the same image. They say, yeah, that's what I want to see. And then when I pull it into Katana or I pull it into Maya, oh yeah, that's the same thing. That's what we're rendering. That's what we're rendering either from a Playblast standpoint, or that's what we're actually rendering from a lighting standpoint.
And it works both ways, right? Because you can actually be informed as to who has seen what, who has picked up what. Right. It's not just, you know, that you're publishing, but you're also interacting and learning back who's taken what.
Yeah, and a lot of that is that you really, you know, storyboard artists and generally lighters don't communicate a lot. I mean, it's just, they're really far apart, right? But with this, it sort of gives you that flexibility of saying, okay, yeah, by the way, if we just made this room a little bit bigger, I could actually get more light in it. If we put a window over here, I could actually see, you know, I could get more light in here. If we put the character here, it's better compositionally. That type of dialogue never happens unless you have a tool that gives you the flexibility of saying, okay, visually I'm looking at the same thing. You're seeing what I'm seeing. You know, it's application independent, so I don't have to, like, again, I don't have to put a QuickTime out there. I don't have to jump through all the hoops is really what it comes down to. It's, you know, the key for me is allowing artists to work together and really effectively without all these barriers, without, you know, different applications and file management and all these things that encumber people. And when you can just give them the ability to look at something, oh yeah, that looks exactly like what I just rendered. That's great. I mean, it's really powerful.
Obviously, I expected a storyboard artist or a layout artist would use FLIX, but it's interesting to hear that somebody that's using Katana is also going to be connected through.
Yeah, and you know, in the key lighting process, or in sort of what we call sort of our scouting process to figure out if an environment is working, we're compressing it essentially.
Get a move on before we run into any more of these creatures.
We have layout artists, storyboard artists, production designers, you know, even the directors from a certain point. I mean, they can, when they're initially looking at a storyboard that's drawn in 2D, they have no idea of the relationships that, especially if they don't have any 3D experience, they have no idea of the relationship of the room that they're shooting in and the, you know, the vista that they're shooting in. And what it really allows you to do is that you kind of bring all these people together and they're all communicating on the same level.
We better get a move on before we run into any more of these creatures.
So you mentioned that scouting process, which I think is kind of interesting. So the sardine circle set, like you get that as like a suggested location effectively? Is that how it works?
Yeah, well, we started with a concept painting for that sort of that big lagoon seating, that big reveal of the actual, the changed island. And this is sort of the very indicative of what actually has happened on the island. This is the big reveal, as it will. And so we're basically given a concept painting, and then modeling went ahead and just blocked out the entire thing. They blocked out based on what they saw from this initial painting. But we knew during the actual, this shot called SAR 60, it's this big start on the characters, and then it comes back. We go through a bunch of go through a bunch of the animals, and then we come all the way back around. We knew that we only really wanted to build out the detail in certain areas. And so, you know, as you generally do, as you would do on set, you'd sort of start to scout out, okay, where can we shoot this? And obviously computer graphics is a little bit different. You can make different choices. You can move mountains, as you will. But we started blocking it out, and they had an initial idea from the storyboards, obviously, of how this thing was going to move. But as with storyboards go, you don't have, oh, what is this tree going to look like? What is this plant going to look like? How close are we to the water? So that's really what we did on the initial pass in layout, and in this scouting staging process is going through and shooting where do we think we're going to place each camera or this moving camera. And then we can send that back. Obviously, we can send that back to storyboard artists to either update it, or we can just go into what we would call a sort of previous stage and just start shooting the entire thing, or a rough layout stage where you're starting to block out your camera, you're placing your characters, and really giving you an indication of what you need to build.
Because this would be a classic case. If I was a Katana lighting guy, I'd want to get a look at this set as early as possible, because it's going to be a pretty complicated set, and there's a lot of things to pick out. We don't want to lose things in shadows.
Yeah, and actually this set, what we ended up using this set for later is that you would shoot it, you had this big reveal shot, but then we end up going further down the river towards what we called sort of the old town. And it really, it expanded even past what that initial big shot reveal was. So we had to shoot on each side of the bank and develop, okay, how many plants are we going to put on this side? How many plants are we going to put on this side? What level of detail do we need to put in based on the aesthetic of the film?
Okay, so let's talk about that key shot, the pullback reveal, the moving camera shot. Like, how many iterations early on would a shot like that go for in terms of just the camera move, camera department stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking a lot. We're talking almost 100 in terms of like trying to get that thing to work, because it was so related to animation as well, in terms of, there's a wild scallion that comes down and dips his head into the water. There's what is it called? The hippopotamus that comes up and the water drips off him. There's birds that are flying towards the camera. So it's a really complex, and obviously it's very orchestrated shot. So it took a lot of time and a lot of iterations in order to try to put that thing together.
But at the other end, how many times did you have to final the shot?
In terms of finaling a shot?
Yeah, in other words, I'm trying to work out whether or not it helped that you could explore 100 versions so that you didn't have to make 100 final renders of it, which would have been kind of pretty time consuming.
Yeah, well, we ended up rendering it a lot. It was the heaviest rendering shot we had on the entire film, because we were so close to the water and we were dealing with, the refraction of the water and a lot of effects and a lot of things that were, it was layers and layers and layers. And actually we ended up splitting it out, I think, into there were 4 lighters that ended up working on it. So you had these sections that each lighter would work on it.
So each of those was in Katana lighting a different section, which would then come together? Would it come together in another Katana session, or do you then take it into Nuke to put it together?
Take it into Nuke and put it together. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those that needed to be split out. And one of the reasons it was one of those shots that, because everybody fell in love with it, we wanted to accelerate it and show it off to the public. So, obviously your best shots always get accelerated because everybody wants to see it and they want to show it off. And that was another reason why we had to break it out.
We better get a move on before we run into any more of these creatures.
Enough to make a grown man cry, but not this man. Get back in there, Tia.
So it's going to end up on your showreel. My question is, though, is it too soon yet? Is it like giving you nightmares, or are you good when you're watching it?
Well, I think, it's funny because we just got out of a meeting that's on a completely different show and we started talking about that shot. So certain shots have the legacy as you move past. I can remember shots on Surf's Up. I can remember other shots on The First Cloudy. Still, where you sort of, it's not like you wake up and you go, I hope it's finished. You finished it, but you kind of remember back and you say, well, that was really hard, but it was obviously it was worth it.
Piece of cake.
Mm.
So when did you first actually join the production?
About 2 years ago, I think.
So what does your job actually entail in a major feature film?
Layout on a major animated movie involves taking the characters, taking the set, and then taking the storyboards and basically building the initial setup for the movie to go into animation. So it's really blocking, cinematography. Those are the main areas.
So one of the things that is great to do in the early stages of a film is actually get some geometry up just so that you can kind of explore a space and then overpaint and do stuff. And that must be something that's well supported then.
It is now very well supported. One of the interesting parts of the FLIX process was that initially we thought it would be a wonderful tool for us to enable us to look at the storyboards and just to use those as reference. And then we realized that if we could start interspersing those images with renders that we were creating in Maya, then we now had a dialogue between ourselves and between the board artists and all the other departments, all the other pre-production departments as well. So what we started doing at that stage was getting the board artists involved in the process, having them come down, talk to us, and start to stage the set, start to put in some rough representation of the 3D set, some characters, and provide them with reference so that they could start drawing more accurately what was ultimately going to be in the movie.
Certainly one of the things I loved about FLIX was the idea that somebody might take some initial geometry, overpaint on it, but the great thing is that you weren't left then with just some arbitrary painting that had come from some arbitrary 3D. You actually could find out what that original lens was, which might be incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. By creating the image and putting it into FLIX, what we now have, obviously, is the metadata that we've never had before. And the iterations that people are putting on there, we can end up with an image that looks almost nothing like our original concept because it's been painted or it's been traced by a board artist. And yet we know that somewhere in there is relevant information that allows us to recreate it after the fact, and that's been invaluable. What we originally thought was that that information was really only going to be useful for us in layout. What we've now realized is that that information is just what modeling, for instance, has always been asking for, because they've always asked us in the past to scout the models, but it's been so early in the process that we haven't received the editorial cut of the movie. Now we don't need the editorial cut of the movie because we now have the boards that the board artists originally have. So even if we don't have any timing, we know what the intention of the boards should be. So then we can go in, we can stage a shot, we can create an image that the modelers can look at and say, yeah, that's exactly what we wanted. They can then go in and just by clicking on the image itself, they can retrieve the metadata and then recreate the shot without even knowing where the initial shot was, or even whether the shot itself was actually saved in any way, shape, or form.
If we all work together, this should be easy as pie.
So in terms of, say, use of FLIX, how early did you first get onto it in terms of getting some imagery into it? And how late in the process did you stop using it?
Well, we used it basically from the beginning. Right?
Yeah, like I mean, even for a beat board pitch that were for our executives to pitch the story as a film, and then also to, you know, the main lot, we also pitched using FLIX. Mm-hmm. So it was like with us from the very beginning.
Now, I had already, just to be completely transparent,
sure.
I had already done another movie using FLIX, and I was used to it. You were like
this
a little bit of
a
sell, right? It was
mm-hmm.
like, yeah.
So,
you know. There was you know,
sure.
but you were convinced pretty quick, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That everything lived in one spot.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as like how long we used it till, it kind of carried us right through, right?
I mean, we basically used it until the last of the animation was done because we were still doing storyboard fixes really up until the last moment.
Yeah.
So I guess question to you, because it was your first time. Would you use it on your next project?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. It's funny because we used to have a folder system where all the drawings were kept, and it was a great way to like find drawings because you go back to those folders. And I had a bit of a fear going into FLIX because everything gets a new number, and it's like, well, how can I find this? Like, you don't have to find it; it's just there. And it took a while for me to realize, like, yes, you can find any drawing you want, going back through history and. Yeah, once I got over that fear, it was pretty awesome.
Change is hard for us.
I don't want to do it.
Get off my yard. No. But I don't know if now I feel the way about FLIX. Like I'll never make another movie without it.
Don't go, FLIX.
Stay.
Thanks, Mike. And by the way, for FX Insider members, I've put up an unedited, extended version of last week's Neville Page FX Guide TV interview on the site, as we had so many hits and amazing tweets about it. Thank you very much. The full version is online now at fxguide.com. If you want to follow us on Twitter, then head to @FXGuideNews. And of course, don't forget the new term has just started over at fxphd.com, including courses on directing and making animated films taught by Lucas Martel. Well, until next time, see ya. For more industry news, in-depth features, podcasts and forums, check out fxguide.com. And for visual effects training, check out fxphd.com.